Have you ever found yourself nodding along with someone, only to later feel manipulated into doing something you didn't even want to? In this video, we're diving into the subtle yet powerful tactics covert manipulators use to exploit your emotions. And here's the kicker: most of these tactics fly under the radar, making them nearly impossible to spot until now. Stick with me, because once you recognize these 5 key behaviors, you'll never fall victim to them again. Have you ever been in a conversation where something felt just slightly off? Like you were only hearing part of the story but couldn't put your finger on what was missing? This is no accident. Manipulators specialize in selective information sharing, giving you just enough details to shape your understanding while keeping crucial facts hidden. It's a tactic designed not only to control the narrative, but more importantly, to bend your decision-making to their will. This technique is subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, because it doesn't immediately look like manipulation. Think about it. When someone tells you something, it's natural to assume they're being honest and complete in what they share. That's the exact assumption manipulators exploit. They don't lie outright. Instead, they carefully curate their words to present a distorted version of reality. By leaving out specific details, or even reframing events with a heavy bias, they force you to draw conclusions that align with their agenda. The target, meanwhile, unknowingly operates with only half the picture, which is the foundation of this control. Imagine this scenario. Your colleague comes to you with an issue about a shared project. They explain that delays are happening because someone failed to meet a deadline. But here's the twist. What they don't tell you is that they actually held on to important documents that prevented that person from completing their part. This omission clouds your judgment, making it seem obvious who's at fault. When the manipulator later swoops in with a solution or takes credit for salvaging things, you might feel grateful or supportive of them, not realizing the hidden role they played in creating the problem to begin with. But this tactic doesn't just stay confined to office politics. It appears in relationships too. Picture a partner who recounts a disagreement they had with a friend, leaving out their own inflammatory remarks or actions. By steering your perception, they win your sympathy or support, without ever giving you a fair understanding of the situation. These moments might feel harmless at first, but over time, a pattern emerges. You realize that most of their stories cast them in a positive light and paint others as unreasonable or unreliable. Yet you can't quite shake the feeling that something is missing. Why do they do it though? For manipulators, it's all about maintaining an upper hand while wearing the mask of helpfulness or innocence. By sharing just enough to steer the conversation or influence your perception, they keep a sense of authority without appearing overbearing. This isn't always done maliciously. Sometimes it's an instinctive behavior rooted in their own insecurities. They fear relinquishing control or being confronted with consequences themselves. Regardless of intent, their approach leaves the other person in a constant state of uncertainty. The psychological impact of selective information sharing can't be overstated. When you repeatedly feel uncertain or confused after conversations, it chips away at your confidence. You start doubting your ability to form clear judgments. This opens the door for further manipulation because now the manipulator becomes your go-to source for clarity, reinforcing their position of power. It's a cruel irony. You trust them more because you feel disoriented. But here's the good news. This tactic can be neutralized. The first step is recognizing it for what it is, a red flag. When someone's version of events consistently feels too convenient or overly skewed in their favor, it's worth questioning. Ask follow-up questions, challenge the gaps, and seek out alternative perspectives wherever possible. Manipulators thrive on your hesitance to question the narrative they provide. By demanding clarity, you not only protect yourself, but also strip away the very power they seek to hold over you. But selective information sharing is just one side of the coin. Manipulative conversations can go even deeper, down to the exact words being used to shape your emotions and decisions. This brings us to an even more insidious tactic: how language itself can be turned into a tool of control. So what happens when words aren't just spoken, but carefully weaponized? What if I told you that a single phrase could completely shift your perspective, make you doubt yourself, or even push you toward a decision that wasn't in your best interest? That's the power of linguistic manipulation. Manipulators are experts at choosing their words deliberately, using language not as a tool for connection, but as a means to control. It's one of the most insidious forms of influence because it feels so natural in the moment, slipping under your defenses unnoticed. This tactic works because our brains respond respond deeply to words that carry emotional weight. Imagine someone telling you, "If you really cared about me, you'd understand," or "I never thought you'd let me down like this." These kinds of statements plant doubt and guilt, causing you to reassess your own actions or feelings. And here's the thing, they don't need to shout or argue to have this effect. Often, it's the quiet, measured delivery of these words that makes them feel even more powerful. By framing their language in a way that exploits your sense of responsibility or compassion, the manipulator can nudge you, gently yet firmly, toward decisions that ultimately benefit them. Let's break this down further. Guilt is one of the most commonly exploited emotions by covert manipulators. Why? Because guilt makes people act. When targeted, you feel compelled to fix something, to smooth over a perceived wrong, even if the wrong doesn't actually exist. Picture this. Your friend claims to feel neglected and says, "It hurts that you don't call me as much anymore. What happened to the old you?" Suddenly, you're questioning whether you've actually been distant, whether you're failing as a friend. You might even overcompensate, calling or checking in more often, even if their accusation was unfounded. Manipulators rely on this response. They pull at your need to feel like a good person, to shift the dynamic in their favor. Tone plays a critical role here as well. The same sentence, depending on how it's said, can carry vastly different meanings. Manipulators instinctively know how to layer the right amount of sadness or disappointment into their voice to drive their words deeper. Think about a partner calmly saying, "I guess I just thought you cared more than this." It doesn't feel like an attack, and yet it tethers itself to your conscience, making you feel like you need to prove otherwise. The other layer of this tactic is the manipulator's tendency to portray themselves as victims. By doing so, they deflect accountability entirely and shift the burden onto you. Statements such as, "I can't believe you'd treat me this way after everything I've done for you," are designed to make you reconsider your boundaries. They turn the focus away from what the manipulator is asking or expecting and instead amplify your own discomfort, leaving you feeling like you're the one in the wrong. Over time, this dynamic can erode your confidence. You start second-guessing not only your actions, but your intentions, unsure whether your boundaries are even reasonable. Recognizing this isn't easy, especially when the person using these tactics is someone close to you. Manipulators are skilled at making their language seem spontaneous and heartfelt, which makes it even harder to spot. But here's the reality. Truly genuine communication doesn't rely on words that manipulate or confuse. When language feels like it's pressuring you, whether through guilt, fear, or shame, it's worth pausing to ask yourself a critical question. What am I being asked to feel right now, and why? When you start noticing emotionally loaded phrases, self-awareness becomes your greatest tool. By taking a moment to detach emotionally and evaluate the intent behind someone's words, you can regain control of the interaction. This doesn't mean challenging others with hostility. It simply means stepping out of the emotional pull long enough to make a clear decision. When you do this, you disarm the manipulator's ability to guide your actions so easily. But language isn't the only weapon in a manipulator's arsenal. Some go even further, adapting their entire behavior to fit the moment, crafting a persona that shifts depending on the audience. So what happens when manipulation goes beyond words and dives into how someone presents themselves entirely? Have you ever watched someone shift their personality entirely depending on who they're with? Around you, they might seem warm, genuine, even vulnerable, but catch them in a different setting and suddenly they're someone else, sharper, colder, or perhaps unusually charming. This isn't just inconsistency, it's often a calculated move designed to gain trust and approval in one context while working toward an entirely different agenda in another. This is the chameleon effect, and when used manipulatively, it's one of the most disorienting tactics to experience. At its core, this tactic is about adaptability, but not in the innocent sense of being flexible or understanding. Instead, manipulators deliberately alter their behavior to fit the expectations or desires of those around them. They calibrate themselves carefully, adjusting their demeanor, tone, and even interests to form a connection that feels effortless and organic to the target. Their goal is to create trust, either to make themselves seem likable, relatable, or indispensable. By weaving themselves into someone's good graces in this way, manipulators gain influence and control. But the real chaos begins when this behavior isn't consistent. A manipulator will often act one way when they're alone with you, but entirely different in another setting. It's not unusual for this to show up in workplace dynamics. Consider the colleague who's completely agreeable and kind to their manager, but subtly condescending or dismissive toward their peers. They might even undermine coworkers behind closed doors, while maintaining an image of the ideal team player in front of leadership. For those who encounter them in different contexts, these personality shifts can be deeply confusing. Is this person a genuine ally, or is their kindness just convenient? The unpredictability of their behavior keeps you questioning. This inconsistency isn't random, it serves a purpose. Manipulators know that people feel unsure around someone whose behavior is constantly changing. This uncertainty makes it difficult to trust your own perceptions. When you observe someone acting charming with one person and calculating with another, you begin to doubt what you know about them, or worse, you doubt your judgment altogether. Over time, you may find yourself rationalizing their behavior. Maybe they're just under stress, or perhaps you're reading too much into it. These rationalizations allow manipulators to continue unchecked. The consequences go deeper than just confusion, though. By presenting different versions of themselves, manipulators foster dependency in their targets. You might feel unsure about how to act around them, adjusting your own behavior to match their mood or persona. This could lead to a situation where you're constantly seeking their approval or validation, hoping to avoid the version of them that feels colder or more dismissive. This pattern slowly wears down your sense of self-assurance, making you more vulnerable to future manipulation. Why do they do this? Often, it stems from a strong craving for approval. Manipulators are deeply attuned to how others respond to them, using this sensitivity not as a way to form genuine connections, but as a tool to gain leverage. A Psychology Today article highlights how manipulators often behave overly agreeable or nice as part of this strategy, not because of inherent kindness, but because it secures them favor and ultimately power. In the workplace, for example, this could mean going out of their way to appear hardworking or helpful in front of a boss, while quietly creating friction among colleagues to climb the ladder unhindered. Recognition is the first step toward protecting yourself from the chameleon effect. The next time you feel someone's behavior radically shift, depending on the audience, let it trigger your instincts. Behavioral shifts on this scale are rarely benign. When something feels off, trust that instinct. Start paying attention to patterns. Are they overly charming with authority figures, but dismissive of those without power? Do their stories or reactions change, depending on who's listening? Observing these inconsistencies isn't about calling someone out immediately. It's about using that information to help you understand their intentions. Once you recognize these shifts, you can start setting boundaries. Detach from the emotional confusion they try to stir, and remind yourself that their behavior isn't a reflection of you. In fact, staying clear and consistent in how you engage with them can make this tactic far less effective. What once felt like a web of confusion begins to lose its power. But even when you learn to recognize their behavior, there's still one major factor to consider: the emotional toll manipulation takes. So, how do you protect your well-being when faced with these tactics? Manipulators may operate from a place of insecurity, but their tactics can create real harm if ignored. By recognizing these behaviors, whether it's selective information sharing, emotionally loaded language, or shifting personas, you take a critical step toward protecting your mental and emotional well-being. Each tactic thrives on one thing: control. But awareness disrupts that control and allows you to reclaim clarity in your interactions. Reflect on your relationships. Are there patterns of guilt, confusion, or self-doubt? When you notice these red flags, practice setting boundaries. By understanding these tactics, you're not just defending yourself, you're choosing honesty, balance, and authentic connection.